Welcome to Yoga with Megan. I am reviewing some information for a workshop this weekend. It's my somatic back care classes, and I do 3 of them. And the first one we start with is the pelvis and the hips, and because that is the center of our universe. So I'm going to teach you one of the very simple movements we do. It's simple yet very profound because it not only takes us into the pelvis and the movement of the back and the hips, but it takes us into the pelvic floor muscles, the transversus abdominis, the front of the abdomen. And additionally, I like to think tail to tongue. So it brings some movement in for the neck, some natural movement. So this is a very gentle practice. Remember, if you're new to somatics, we want to be very gentle. The slower, the more your brain will soak up the information. But find a mat or something you want to take yourself down on. I will actually practice this often before I get out of bed in the morning, but my bed is a little bit firmer, so if that works for you, you can do that too. So coming down, feel free to just shift your hips side to side first, and I want you to feel your right hip and your left hip, because we want to be able to point out all these areas in the backside. So I want to feel my right hip, the back of that, and I'll rock onto my left hip and feel that. And then with the knees still bent, start to draw the knees into your body. And notice as you draw the knees in, the tailbone will start to lift. You'll feel your weight go into your sacrum. And stop there for a moment, maybe rolling on your sacrum. So we don't need to pull in too far, just noticing when the weight is resting on the sacrum. As the thighs go away, your low back will arch a little bit and you'll go onto your tailbone. So these are just markers we're going to be using. As you draw the knees in further, you'll start to feel the tailbone and the sacrum curl up away from the floor, and the low back, the lumbar spine will press into the floor, and you might even feel your low ribs. So if there was an arch in the low back, that's gone now. And you can just sense that area. So we're going to take the feet down to the floor, and we start with the breathing. If you'd like to, you can place your hands on your belly. If you're not used to breathing to the belly, think of your navel center and the space just above the navel center, nothing forced. But notice how as you breathe in, your body should naturally fill. It'll expand. And as you breathe out, the body will naturally come back in or contract. And just sensing that movement, imagine you're pressing your hands up towards the sky with your in-breath, just slightly, and then release the hands back down as the abdomen comes towards the back of the spine on your out-breath. So focusing your awareness and your breath in your abdomen. So as I'm doing this, I'm noticing that I'm a little bit uncomfortable on one side of my left hip, so I'm just going to scooch a little bit. You're always welcome to do that. I'm in what's called constructive rest, so my feet are right underneath my knees. I want my tailbone long or my low back long, but that natural curve is there in the low back. And back to our breathing. So I want you to imagine in your body that you have a clock face. We have to go old school, no digital, real clock face. And where your tailbone is and your sacrum is your 12 o'clock. And now as that belly balloons up, I want you to slightly press your tailbone and your sacrum forward and into the floor. So that it's like the belly lifts the low back, the lumbar spine off the floor as the tailbone presses down. And then I'm just going to exhale and release that. And I'm going to do that again. Inhale as if the belly fills up and lifts my low back off the floor. The tailbone presses down in the sacrum. And exhale and come back down. Do just a few of those. So the inhalation is the effort to lift. Your abdomen stretches, as does your pelvic floor. So if you want to visualize that diamond shape between the thighs, your pelvic floor stretches as the abdomen stretches. As you exhale, there's a gentle contraction in the pelvic floor and the abdominal wall. But we're not forcing it, we're just letting it happen. One more, inhaling, tailbone and sacrum into the floor. I'm going to move my hands, I apologize, so you can see. It's just this inhaling up and then exhaling, returning to neutral. Now that you're back to neutral, visualize the space in the low back, so where that little arch was, and just above that in the low ribs. So I'm going to keep my hands out here. You're welcome to keep your hands on your body. Now the effort is going to be on the exhalation. So as you exhale, you're going to press the low back and low ribs into the floor as the abdominal wall draws in, and you might feel your tailbone and your sacrum slightly lift up. And then I'm just going to inhale and release back to neutral. So I'm not going to lift all the way, I'm just going to release. Exhale, pressing the 6 o'clock. So this is the 6 o'clock down. Inhale, release that pressure. And it's just a soft pressure. Exhaling, 6 o'clock presses down, low back, low ribs. I might feel the pelvis sort of rock towards my heart and the front rim of the pelvis downward. And then I'm releasing completely. And that is your 6 o'clock. Going back and forth. The other thing I'm watching for is I want to try to keep my legs as relaxed as possible, no tension in my legs. Additionally, my arms, my shoulders. So if I wasn't trying to get my arms out of the way, I might be here. This is just a movement for the pelvis. So now we're going to put those two movements together. So your 12 o'clock is your tailbone and your sacrum, and your 6 o'clock is your low back and low ribs. So now the breath becomes a very integral part of this. As I inhale, my belly fills, tailbone and sacrum press down, my low back arches, so you can think of it as the arch. And as I exhale, I'm going to gently press the low back, low ribs into the floor, and my low back will curl or lengthen and stretch as my tailbone lifts and the front body will contract. So I'm going to go between that inhalation into the 12 o'clock and exhalation into the 6 o'clock. And I'm doing this mostly just right now for functional movement, feeling my pelvis rock forward. The front rim will rock forward and upward on inhale. And back and down, you can think of your pelvis like a bowl. But notice how the breath is helping this too. Inhaling, the abdomen expands, the pelvic floor stretches. Exhalation, the pelvic floor engages and tightens, and so do the abdominal muscles. But then look at it the other way around. As you inhale, the low back contracts. As you exhale, the low back relaxes. So just finding a few more of those back and forth until we've located this movement between the 12 and the 6 o'clock. Feels really good, really soft. So you notice I'm not coming all the way up and squeezing my glutes. I want to keep the muscles in my buttocks and my thighs relaxed. I'm not overdoing it. It's just a gentle rocking motion. All right. Now we want to find our 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. So 3 o'clock is going to be your right hip. You can put your hand on your right hip, and your 9 o'clock is your left hip. And we're going to do just that 3 o'clock first. So on an inhalation, I'm going to try to lift my 3 o'clock up. So what I'll feel is my weight will roll through the center of my back and into my left hip. And then I'm going to exhale, release it down. Working from just this right side. Inhale, lift that right hip up off the floor. Notice how the weight will transfer into the left hip. Exhale, release back to neutral. Feel the weight roll through the center of the spine and then back into both hips equally. The other thing we want to watch when we do this one is that we're not going for how much motion can we get, how much mobility. If that were the case, then I'd be pressing into my heel and I could come all the way up here. But that's not the point. I want to use these outer hip muscles, outer pelvic muscles, so my heel's staying relaxed in my leg, and I feel the muscle squeeze on my outer hip. So right out here, your little glutes, I call them, and then release back down. So you're squeezing these outer hip muscles to lift your 3 o'clock, and then releasing it back down. Let's do one more on that right side, and recognize that sometimes one side is stickier than the other. That's very common. All right, so now you'll see it from the other side because I'm going to do my left hip, which is my 9 o'clock. And again, your hands are tools for your awareness. You can keep that hand right on the front of the left hip. And I have to think about this one a little bit more. I'm going to inhale and lift the left hip slightly off the floor so I'll feel my weight transfer through the center of my spine and into my right hip. And then just release it. Let go to neutral. I call that the peaceful pause at the bottom of the exhale. Inhale, lift up the left hip. And exhale, release. And if you feel like you're using all the muscles in your leg, go ahead and do that once. Press into the foot, lift with your leg, and notice you could probably go a lot further, but that's not what we're gearing towards. You want to release back down. Now keep that leg relaxed. Try to squeeze the muscles on the outer hip to lift the left hip. Feel yourself roll onto your right hip on inhale, and exhale, drop back down. You might notice, well, I'm turning my head partially because of the camera, but that's part of it, is we're going to add a head turn in a moment. Coming back and forth. All right, so now that we found the 3 o'clock right hip, And the 9 o'clock left hip, we're going to put those two together. So I'm going to inhale, lift my 3 o'clock, roll into my 9 o'clock. Exhale, release down. And then inhale, lift my 9 o'clock, roll into my 3 o'clock. So it's basically a little bit of think of it as a pelvic rotation from side to side. And when we walk, this is very similar to the movement we do when we walk, is one leg comes forward, one hip comes forward, right? There's a little bit of a rotation there. And that's what I'm doing. I'm rotating my pelvis on inhale, but releasing back to neutral on exhale. If you'd like to add the head and neck to this, I like to look out over the shoulder of the hip that's lifting. Just let your head roll. And then let the head come back to center when the pelvis comes to center. Nice and slow with your breath. Turning towards my right shoulder as my right hip lifts. Releasing back. Let's do one more to each side. Inhaling left hip up. Exhaling back. So again, remember, it's really normal to feel like one side of the body has got this down and the other side's kind of sticky. I always have a sticky hip. Got to wake it up. All right, coming back to the center. So now we've found our 12 o'clock, which is our tailbone and our sacrum, our 3 o'clock, which is our right hip, the 6 o'clock is the low back and low ribs, and the 9 o'clock is the left hip. So now if we think of that clock face, I get to move around in that clock face, and it feels wonderful. No restrictions other than try not to use the leg muscles. So I'm going to roll onto the tailbone first. And then I'm going to go into my 3 o'clock, and then back into my 6 o'clock, onto my 9 o'clock, and then back to the 12. And you can continually roll, or maybe you just want to stop at neutral, especially if you ever feel any tension building in your shoulders. And I know this sounds crazy, but we will try to move our pelvis from our shoulders. That's why we hold tension. We have certain places we hold tension. So keep the arms as relaxed as possible, right? Or if you feel tension building in your legs. So you're just exploring making these circles. And it's really wonderful to notice all the places that the pelvis can move. And I am going clockwise first, from the 12 o'clock pressing down to the 3 o'clock pressing down, and then the 6 o'clock and the 9. Feels really good. And for some reason, for me, this direction comes easily. My brain doesn't always want to switch, but we're going to go ahead and switch. And go nice and slow. So now we're going to go from the 12 o'clock, press down into the 9 o'clock. Notice where you try to skip out, then press down to the 6 o'clock, into the 3 o'clock, and then back to the 12. And just feeling like your pelvis can just go in these gentle circles, and noticing what muscles within the pelvis you're using to make these circles. Everything else is relaxed. If you find that your head wants to go along for the ride, we did a specific movement with the head going back and forth, but sometimes I think that the neck just wants to respond, right? So as you move your pelvis, if your head and neck want to move, you can do that. Sometimes you need to roll your shoulders to relax them. Yeah, that's it. And then come back to your neutral position. You might rest with your knees falling together, or if it's comfortable for your low back, you can take your legs long, take your arms up overhead, full body stretch, and sigh out the mouth, let it go. So that's a very simple one, the pelvic clock. Please feel free to take a rest after that if you'd like. And as I said, this one progresses, the pelvic clock will progress into more movements with the upper back, the shoulders, the neck. It can take you throughout the entire length of the spine. But we start from the center of our